We we are now live and in cyberspace, and hopefully you guys are having a great day. It was very mellow here in the Midwest, which is a good thing. In the mid 70s, and Chicago was just kind of luxuriating in this balmy, mild weather. And I am back with the book, and we are looking at A Course in Miracles, and we are going to, as usual, start off with a lesson. And today's lesson that I thought I would pull up to share is actually one of the most illuminating lessons that is available to us, because it clarifies things that frequently seem to be scary, seem to be oppressive, heavy, negative. It's that very simple word. The simple word is sin. And that really is what we're talking about here, is how does Jesus, in his presentation of A Course in Miracles, define sin? So in order to get some insight around this, we'll go to lesson lesson number 4 in the workbook. Let me clarify that. That's not quite right. We're in lesson number 250, and it is section 4, and it starts off with the question, what is sin? Sin is insanity. It is the means by which the mind is driven mad and seeks to let illusions take the place of truth. And being mad, it sees illusions where the truth should be and where it really is. Sin gave the body eyes, for what is there the sinless would behold? What need have they of sights or sounds or touch? What would they hear or reach to grasp? What would they sense at all? To sense is not to know, and truth can be but filled with knowledge and with nothing else. So we're getting some kind of complex concepts that are being presented here in this little introductory dialogue. You know, first we're given the idea that sin is insanity, and that kind of takes the pressure off, because we have so many different sources telling us that sin is evil and that it must be punished, and there has to be some kind of justice served when sin is involved. And really that just boils down to the idea of retribution, of revenge. And in truth, sin has to be looked at from an entirely different perceptive plateau here. We have to get above that dark, condemning, ego-based idea of sin and look at it for what it actually is. And it's simply madness. You have succumbed to the madness that the mind has generated. So, you know, as we're looking at sin and recognizing the truth about what sin is, it really does give us a certain element of relief, because when we're perceiving sin as this evil thing, it loads us up with guilt, and it causes us to retract, to come into ourselves, but in a negative way, to close ourselves off from, especially from God or the presence of the light, but also from our fellow companions here on this little planetary adventure that we're having. So as we contemplate that idea that sin is the means by which the mind is driven mad. And the mind then seeks to let illusions take the place of truth. We see what an insidious thing we have set up. It's not evil in that sense of something you should feel guilt over, but it is unnecessary, because to believe in sin is to believe in being off your rocker, for lack of a better word. So as we continue here, the next paragraph gives us even deeper insight as to how all of these events that came together, that created our physical, corporeal being, our body, what they are, and what it means to be a body. It says the body is the instrument the mind made in its efforts to deceive itself. Its purpose is to strive, yet can the goal of striving change? And now the body serves a different aim for striving. What it seeks for now is chosen by the aim the mind has taken as a replacement for the goal of self-deception. Truth can be its aim as well as lies. The senses will then seek instead for witness to what is true. And a couple of days ago, I came across a TED Talk that was about an 18 or 20-minute dialogue about how we create our reality. And some very, very deep concepts were being tossed about as a result of research. And so we're seeing more and more on a scientific level of observing phenomena and drawing conclusions from that, that the deeper we go into the study of the mind, the more we become aware of the power of the mind. And that really is one of the big secrets that the mind has suffered from over the ages, because the ego really wants to diminish the power of the mind, though the mind doesn't really do anything, it just thinks. And that is not at all true. The mind is fully capable of projecting everything from, a fairy tale like Peter Pan, or, something light and lofty and funny and humorous and childish, all the way down to the depths of Dante's Inferno from the Divine Comedy. And every time that you have a fantasy, every time that you engage the mind for whatever it is that you are looking for relief, the mind is going to respond appropriately. So we do have to be very conscious of what we are encouraging the mind to look at. And of course, the best of all things to encourage the mind to do is to come to a place of stillness. Because within the stillness, what's going to happen? Well, since the mind is the generator of your reality, it will stop creating the illusion that you are trapped in. And as that occurs, the restoration of the truth of who you are and where you are is once again restored. And those brief moments of emptiness, of blankness, allow you to recapture the serenity and the depth that comes from that inner communion, that inner union with the divine, with God, the Father. So, looking at the mind from a different angle and looking at the idea of sin as not being the evil source of condemnation that modern or ancient religion, all religion generally attributes to it, is a very significant step away from all of the fear that keeps you trapped and keeps you engaged. So as we continue with this lesson, it says, sin is the home of all illusions, which but stand for things imagined. So we're being told here very clearly that sin is not real. It is imagined experiences, imagined concepts, imagined ideas, issuing from thoughts that are untrue. They are the proof that what has no reality is real. Sin proves God's Son is evil. Timelessness must have an end. Eternal life must die. And that really is the darkest aspect of what we are trying to teach ourselves with the idea of sin, is that, number one, we're capable of doing something heinous, like murdering the neighbor next door, or, stealing something from somebody down the street. All of these dark images, all of these things that we look down upon and frown upon, really are nothing. They are complete illusions. But we take them very seriously. The mind takes them very seriously and loads up on guilt. And guilt generates fear. The fear generates anger. And we're caught in the loop. We're just going on and on and on this adventure that has absolutely no basis in reality. So as we continue here, it says, and God himself has lost the Son he loves, with but corruption to complete himself, his will forever overcome by death, love slain by hate, and peace to be no more. So these are all the consequences of the idea of sin. But the truth is that sin itself is a fantasy. So we've created an erroneous state of being in which we imagine that we deserve the condemnation of God and of our brothers and sisters on the earthly plane. And ultimately, we shrink back down into that little tiny, tiny idea of identity we call the ego. And the ego is the most vulnerable, fear-driven, insane creation that we could actually consciously bring into manifestation. So we are the ones who are not victims of exterior forces. We have simply allowed ourselves to kind of flutter off and fall into the depths of madness for a while. We entertain this idea that we know what we're doing, we know who we are, we know where we belong, but the truth is our true identity is completely hidden from us. And a part of that mechanism that keeps it hidden from us is the fear that we have generated around the idea that we have sinned. So it's an interesting loop. It's an interesting domino effect, how one thing affects another, and yet it is so lucid when you start to look at it through the eyes of Jesus, through the Course in Miracles. So anyway, as we continue here, a madman's dreams are frightening, and sin appears indeed to terrify. And yet what sin perceives, it is but a childish game. So now we're really taking the pressure off around the idea of sin. And we always have to have that realization that this is not a solitary journey. So you cannot perceive sin in others without perceiving it within yourself, because that is how intimately connected everyone here on the planet actually is. So if you're looking for somebody to blame and assault and accuse, you're looking around for somebody else to project sin upon, you're going to load up on that same element within your own consciousness. That part of the mind, the subconscious realm, that hidden thing that you don't want to look at, is loaded with guilt and fear, anger, resentment, rejection, all from your willingness to perceive sin in those around you. So we have to see sin for what it is. It is nothing. It has no power. All of the events that we have created in this hallucination that we're engaged in never in fact happened, and we never left our intimate union with God. You know, we live and move and have our being in God, and God is as pure as the most beautiful dawn that has ever occurred. There is that absolute purity in God, and so we could not be sinful and exist in God. We're merely having a bad dream. So it goes on to say, and yet what sin perceives is but a childish game. The Son of God may play he has become a body, prey to evil and to guilt, with but a little life that ends in death. But all the while his Father shines on him and loves him with an everlasting love, which his pretenses cannot change at all. So, you know, when we really look at sin in depth, we can get beyond so many pitfalls in such a immediate leap of understanding, because by recognizing the nothingness of sin and by not projecting the guilt and the shame and the anger on those around us, or burying it more deeply within our own mind, we begin to disengage step by step from this dream that is based on that one simple and insane concept of death. We believe that death is real. We create a body so we can watch it deteriorate and ultimately die, and then we fall into another dream. So it's a very good game that we have created, but it is totally, ultimately pointless. And that is, I think, the hardest thing for most people to really grasp, is that it's not evil, it's not bad, it's not something to be condemned about. It's simply meaningless, it's pointless. So why pursue something that is pointless when you can very easily let go of it and just allow it to disappear, allow it to vanish in its own way? And the more we practice stepping into that silence, calming the mind, allowing the Holy Spirit to introduce us back to God. You know, we never left God, but we imagined that we did. And the Holy Spirit is always alert for the opportunity to open up that avenue wherein we re-experience our truth. It's all very simple, and yet we have created such a complex world and immersed ourselves in it that we have become brain dead, as it were, and trapped in this consistent resurrection of all of these ideas that are not based on reality. Sin, sickness, death, and worst of all, the rejection of God, the rejection of our source, the rejection of that which we actually are. How long, O Son of God, will you maintain the game of sin? Shall we not put away these sharp-edged children's toys How soon will you be ready to come home? Perhaps today. There is no sin. Creation is unchanged. Would you still hold return to heaven back? How long, O Holy Son of God? How long? That's a good question. How long are you going to imagine that the gifts of this physical world are worth the value that you have placed on them? And the truth is, every beautiful and joyous and good thing that we experience in this world is it's just a faint memory in the back of the mind of our union with God and with the aesthetic state of love, living in a depth of love that is beyond any form of human ecstasy. So anyway, if you're if you're into A Course in Miracles, I recommend going back and looking at this lesson every once in a while and reinforcing that idea that, number one, you have not sinned, and number two, sin is not real. So it reduces everything down to a very easy and gentle release of all of the things that are bogging you down, all of the disease, all of the frustration, all of the discomfort. All of these things are not real. So why indulge them? Why give them to yourself on a daily basis? So, having looked at a lesson for the day, we are going to go back to the text now. And I'm picking up here in chapter 5, the message of the crucifixion, because the crucifixion is a really scary concept, I think, for most people. You know, they relate to it as this process of being hacked to pieces, of being subjected to the ultimate level of pain and horror and torture. And yet Jesus, in A Course in Miracles, gives us a whole different understanding as to what the crucifixion was all about, the purpose that it served. And one of the clues that we have from the New Testament is that in that process of being crucified, at the very end of this horrific drama that was being played out in Golgotha, he makes that very profound statement, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And that, I think, is a very insightful idea also, because what happens within that is that you realize that beyond the appearance of the blood and the gore and all the other horrors that are going on, there is a space of serenity that Jesus resides in, where he can look at all of these events and accept them and forgive them, and to know with absolute certainty that he is not that body that is being shredded and torn up on the cross. And that is such a relief when we finally arrive at that understanding that we are not a body. Even though we imagine ourselves to be crucified almost on a daily level, you know, we have our dramas and relate to Jesus dragging that cross up the hill. But the truth is, he went through that as an example for us to rise to a much higher level of conscious living beyond this body and beyond all of the acts of evil and death and destruction that the body is associated with. So as we continue, he says, "As I have said before, as you teach, so shall you learn. If you react as if you are persecuted, you are teaching persecution. This is not a lesson a son of God would want to teach if he is to realize his own salvation. So what you are teaching with your thought system is going to affect you first and central to every other circumstance around you. It says, rather teach your own perfect immunity, which is the truth in you, and realize that it cannot be assailed. So this again is getting back to that idea of the crucifixion. You know, after all of these events were over and the resurrection came into place, he came back without condemnation. You know, nowhere in the Bible or any other text related to Jesus do we have any kind of rhetoric about the idea of I was a victim and you guys really are going to get served up a heap of justice. God's going to come down and strike you dead. See, and that's, again, what a lot of religious practices are based on, especially in the Christian community, although some outside the Christian community teach that also. But the realization that if you are teaching those around you that you are a victim, that you are persecuted, that you are compromised, that you are mortal, that you are subject to death, then you're eating those ideas yourself. You're infesting them into your being. So we have to get out of that idea of this acceptance of death and this acceptance of pain and sorrow and misery, because the only way we can have those experiences is if we bring them to ourselves. If we reach into that part of our mind that is mad, that is insane, and draw that insanity into our day-to-day existence, you will be crucified every hour, and it'll just be ongoing. So this is really a very profound process of stepping out of your own misery, of stepping out of your own sorrow, and stepping out of your own limitations. As it goes on, it says, rather teach your own perfect immunity, which is the truth in you, and realize that it cannot be assailed. Do not try to protect it yourself, or you're believing that it is assailable. So when we set up blockades, when we step into that place of self-protection, that is the admittance that we are vulnerable, that we need to protect ourselves. So once again, we have to get back to the recognition that this life, even though it's being generated by our own mad fear and our own mad insanity, the truth is, it is simply a vapor. It is simply this ethereal kind of dream that we have created. It has no foundation. And we have that option of stepping away from it. So your resurrection is your reawakening. I am the model for rebirth, but rebirth itself is merely the dawning on your mind of what is already in it. So your truth is already there. It already exists within your mind. All you have to do is let go of this interior dialogue that the mad part of your mind constantly is projecting as being real and true. Silence the mind, experience that silence, and then lift yourself up. Throw away your crutches. Stop bumbling around in this mortal world and take on the power that is your inheritance. And that's what it's all about. It's a very simple process, but we have complicated it to the point where we have become so blind and so deaf and so stupid in our journey that we have trapped ourselves in this mortal realm, and we go down dirty every time, whether it's a disease, an accident, old age, whatever. The whole process of death means that you go down dirty, and that's just the way it works. You cling to that body, that illusion of that body, until it disintegrates. And then you're stuck creating another body and coming back for round 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Anyway, that's pretty much all for this evening. Next week we'll be taking another look at a lesson, and we'll also be looking at more of the ideas that Jesus is sharing with us about the idea of the crucifixion, and more importantly, the resurrection, because that is our right, that is our heritage, to be resurrected from this endless cycle of death, 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 death. And birth is such a mortal principle, because that which we are, really in truth, was never born. We come out of a state of eternity, and that is what we will return to when we give up our addiction to this material world. So anyway, I hope you have a fabulous solstice. It's occurring right now as I speak, it seems. And we are at that pivotal point where we're falling out of spring, or springing forth into summer, however you want to look at it. And summertime is a time to be lazy, enjoy life, share love, get out, and give a little grace to everybody you encounter. So anyway, I'll be back in 1 week. Get out there, share the love, pass the love around, and I'll be speaking with you soon.